Hello again, this is Grant Swartzwelder, and welcome to another episode of Oilfield Strong. This is going to be a slightly different one because it goes back in history to a conversation I had with Chairman Drew Darby of the Texas House. Because the topic is about electricity and the need for more electricity and energy coming from West Texas. I think it's become an even more important topic because of the AI and data centers and all the amount. But even before then, there was a dearth of electricity and power that from West Texas, and there's a lot of need for the state to work together. Chairman Darby is a leader statewide and nationally in this area. He's chairman of the Energy Resource Committee at the state legislature, but he's also chairman of the Energy Council, which is 12 states, talking about this topic. So I think bringing this conversation back up could really be helpful because it explains the local and state politics that would really affect this. So with that, I invite you to listen to Chairman Darby as he talks about electricity and the grid and the issues that will affect West Texas, but the state as a whole.
Thank you for being, it's wonderful to be with you today, Grant. Your podcasts are wonderful, and I've viewed several of them, and you're getting the message out, and I'm thankful for that. It is my privilege to represent a part of the Permian Basin, and I've been a 50-year oil and gas lawyer, so I've watched many cycles up and down of this oil and gas industry since the early 70s. I will tell you that it's the reports of the demise of the oil and gas industry have been greatly exaggerated, as the old story goes. And we continue to be resilient. We continue to be innovative. We continue to be responsive to the needs of our state and, of course, our nation and the world, for that matter. So in order to do that, you have to be forward-thinking. You have to embrace technology. You have to prepare yourself and the industry for the changes that are on the horizon. Well, clearly the oil and gas boom, fueled by fracking technology and the need to deliver more oil and gas molecules to the market, and the reality is those molecules are located in parts of this state that we don't have refineries. And so you have to deliver those molecules to where there is refining capability. And today that capability is on the Gulf Coast. So in order to avail yourself of those wonderful discoveries and technology, you've got to get product to market. And that requires either highways, or it requires a pipeline, or it requires a rail line. And the South Orient rail line, of course, runs through the Concho Valley all the way from Coleman down to Presidio. And in the early days of fracking and discovery, there was not enough capacity. So we're thankful that the state of Texas owns a rail line that was able to deliver that capacity to market. It took for every rail car, it takes 4.5 18-wheelers off the road. So we were able to use rail. 18-wheelers initially, delivering it back, then rail. Now we built some takeaway capacity in pipelines. There are more pipelines being built. And so the point of my discussion is that where you have production of energy doesn't necessarily mean the place where you have to deliver it to, where the need is. And that's exactly true with our electrification problem. Every one of these major oil companies have made commitments to their shareholders, to their bankers, to the credit facilitators, that they will become more and more carbon neutral. And in order to do that, they have to transition from compressing stations that are driven by diesel generators And so they need electrification to do that. So to be responsive and be honor the commitments made by their staff and shareholders, and they have to electrify more and more of their operations. Well, what we saw in Winter Storm Uri, which is in the March or February of 2021. We saw a lot of our compressor stations that were shut off. They weren't identified as critical infrastructure, and when you had load shed events that Winter Storm Uri had, then they were simply cutting off a large swath of area, and they did not know that those sites were actually critical. So, well, all of this points to the need that we need more information about these critical infrastructure sites, and that we need to deliver more and more electricity to those sites and others that we're finding now as the energy market continues to develop resources. You see more and more places where we're going to need electrification. Well, that's a great problem to have, but it is a problem because you have to some way connect those sites to the grid, and that grid, for the most part, we've not seen a major transmission line here in West Texas, West and North Central Texas. We've not seen the ERCOT or the PUC address our transmission needs. Well, 6 of the major producers in the Permian Basin last year in 2022 commissioned a study. And that study said, we're going to need more electricity. Bottom line, we're going to need more electricity in order to honor our commitments for electrification and to deliver electricity to the sites where we need to drill and produce and store and deliver. So, so that study was commissioned by large operators such as Diamondback and ConocoPhillips and Pioneer and others, showed that we need to greatly expand because your need, Grant, out here in West Texas, yours and my needs, and the operators and the people we live and work with are going to need to increase their demand for electricity. If they're going to develop, they're going to need to increase it from about 4.2 gigawatts to almost 17.6 gigawatts by the year 2030. So, in order,
is that number? Sorry, Chairman Darby, is that number for the Permian or for the state?
That's just the Permian Basin. We're just talking about the Permian Basin.
Okay.
And I said 2030, I meant 2032. So between now and 2032, we're going to increase the grid from our current capacity of about 4.2 gigawatts to almost 17.6 gigawatts. And so that just can't happen overnight. You have to build capacity, and the planning process necessary to do that, it takes time. The PUC and ERCOT have a very lengthy approval period for transmission projects, and so you've got to get them in the pipeline, get them ready to go. And so this report was produced in December of 22. It was available to the legislature as we went through our work in the 88th legislative session. I'm comfortable in saying I filed several bills, 2848 being one, that did not ultimately pass the House. It failed on a point of order. But there was another couple of bills that were designed to try to help, and I think they're going to help a little bit, but they do not address the overall predicament that we're in. We do not have enough transmission capacity to meet those goals that I just outlined for you by electrification of the Permian Basin and the Delaware Basin, and by the increased demand that's going to take. That we're going to have to increase it from, well, almost 2/3. I mean, go from 4.2 to 17.6 is a huge leap of capacity, but there's a long runway for transmission projects. So I think the legislature has failed to meet its obligation for addressing these needs and concerns. I'm afraid that what we have in place does not give us the priority that is necessary if we're going to meet the needs of this country. We're going to have more production out of the Permian Basin and the Delaware Basin. And in order to do that, we're going to have more electrification and capacity, and that's brought by transmission. And so that's what I'm a tireless advocate for. And this is not my first session to do this. I have tried to address transmission for at least the past 3 sessions, and we keep getting met with folks who profit by this inefficiency. Grant, you may shake your head and say, well, why would they act in their own financial benefit and reject the needs of the many? Well, that's what happens. There are people that make money in scarcity pricing. There are manufacturers, among others, that have had the ability to turn off the demand for making widgets. And by turning off that demand, they can sell their produced energy at a much higher profit than they can make producing widgets. And so they're making money in that regard, and they're not paying for transmission costs themselves. They get to avoid those costs. So
one of the examples of that was looked like during the heat waves, Bitcoin, where we ended up, didn't ERCOT pay Bitcoin manufacturers millions of dollars to?
Yeah, and it's not an insignificant amount of millions.
Yeah.
I think I'm totally off. I know that, but I'm talking about paid one Bitcoin manufacturer $11 million to turn it off for a couple of days, and that's just, he can't make that much money manufacturing Bitcoins during that period.
Not at all.
It's all out of whack, and so go ahead.
So your point is on transmission, but there's also the generation side, and both seem to be an issue. But or am I missing it? That transmission
no.
is an issue.
No, the point I'm trying to make, we have seen a proliferation of solar resources and wind projects, and because of this, and your viewers know it also, we have a lot of sun in West Texas, and the wind blows.
And wind
seems like it never stops. Well, and we've got a lot of land, and most of it is relatively inexpensive. So if you were a developer of some of those projects, where would you put your plant? Well, you'd put it where we have the highest radiant heat. You'd put it where we have the wind that blows all the time, and the land is cheaper. Well, that's not necessarily those projects are not necessarily located next to Houston or Dallas or Austin, where the demand is. So you locate them where it's economically feasible. That's West Texas and North Texas right now. So we've got to get those generative projects to the market. Well, we've not addressed the transmission. And what the PUC does is, in effect, act as a traffic cop on the existing transmission lines. He says you can't get more than X on this line at a specific time, and therefore everybody's got to shrink. Well, everybody becomes less efficient. If you're told that you're going to reduce your capacity by 15%, well, then it makes your project less efficient, less financially secure. Right. And so that congestion, if you will, that results in what the ERCOT calls a generic transmission constraint. Well, there's a huge one on the West Texas line, which comes to market down through West Texas and goes into the Kerrville area. There's a huge constraint on that, resulting in about $3 billion overall on the whole market, on the whole grid, about $3,000 in increased cost, electric costs that consumers pay because of those constraints. There are 16 of them located throughout the state of Texas. And so those 16 constraints, what that tells you is there are 16 areas of our state that have more capacity to deliver electricity down that line than they're capable of receiving. That's just the bottom line. And so overall, those 16 constraints result in about $3 billion of additional or higher electric costs that they see on their bill because of those constraints. Well, my purpose is to address those constraints. Let's expedite the transmission process. Let's make it quicker, more efficient, and let's deliver projects to areas that will address generic transmission constraints. And so we seem to be faced, in this process with a lot of folks, particularly manufacturers who live and work along the Gulf Coast. They make money. They make money with additional or higher costs, and they avoid all transmission costs. So it's a money game, and quite frankly, our needs out here in West Texas are not being addressed because of that fight, if you will, over new transmission projects.
And is it purely, well, I know the answer to it. It's not purely a legislative issue, is it? Or is that the bottleneck? That you got to have power companies building these lines and doing all, but I guess it's the permitting and things that legislature controls that can dictate that? Or you see my question, is it more government or private sector that's really the holdup?
It's both. As most things, it's both. Clearly, the legislature is responsive to the needs of its constituents. Well, guess what? There are a lot of legislators that are from the Houston, Dallas, San Antonio area that listen to the big players in their district and give them contributions. And so they, when we start talking about adding a new transmission line or multiple lines, they start squealing that, well, we don't want our customers to pay more for that. Well, so it's clearly a push and pull. The legislature and the PUC and ERCOT are responsive to that. But we can control in the legislature the methodology and the criteria that those entities use to determine whether a transmission project should move forward or not. One of the problems is the levelization of costs. Currently, ERCOT is not taking into consideration the long-term effect of transmission lines. If you are a businessman, you're putting in a plant, you don't think you're going to recoup all the costs of that plant installation in the first year. Well, you have a longer view of that. You think that plant, or I don't think you'd build it on 1 year's worth of economics. You're going to build it over 20, 30 years her view of the horizon of how you're going to make money in that plant. So, but right now, the transmission system is, with the language that the legislature has put in, those levelized costs are viewed more on a short-term basis than they are over the life of 20-year life, if you will, of a transmission line, or a 30 or 40-year life of transmission line. So that's one of the problems, and the legislature has to instruct ERCOT and PUC to look at those levelized costs over a longer period of time to make these transmission projects more seemingly cost efficient. So legislature plays a big part of this, but clearly industry, those 6 operators that I talked about, the Diamondbacks, the Pioneers, they're concerned. They voiced their opinion. I've read their report. I've tried to respond to it. Well, there are some, mostly in the metropolitan areas, that look at that same report and say, yeah, that's fine and dandy, but I don't want to have to pay any more on my electricity bill. And we have a system here in this state that you got to have majority of the votes to get it off the floor and get it signed by the governor. And we're just not there yet. And I don't know, quite frankly, Grant, what it's going to take. I would not want another catastrophic event like Winter Storm Uri to have officials look seriously at these transmission projects and try to address that, because the reality is you can build these time periods were set up when a thermal generation plant, I mean a natural gas fired plant, those plants take eight to 10 years to plan and put on the ground and put in place. And so the approval process for transmission projects kind of reflect that time period. Well, now we've seen, especially renewables, you can have a renewable project in a couple of years, 3 to 4 years. So, but our transmission approval process has not been updated to reflect that. And so that's why it is a priority. It's a priority, should be a priority of the legislature, and it's certainly a priority of mine.
Well, you're painting a pretty dire situation, because you say by 2032, which I would think for these large projects, that's right across right next to the.
It's in our front yard.
Yeah. And then, we deal with a lot of these operators you talk about that are electrifying everything they do because of the ESG requirements. And you wonder at some point they're going to wake up and these little co-ops out in Delaware Basin just won't have that electricity. So it's seems like we're posed for a major issue much sooner than later with that. So, and obviously that's
I
your
agree with you, Grant. This is not something we can, quote, kick the can down the road much longer. I mean, we're going to have to address it. So,
and then based on your point about the individual politics, you got your work ahead of you, it seems like. So, you mentioned Superstorm Erie. Well, how do you think that's gone with the whole winterification and to make sure that hasn't that we won't have that happen again?
Well, I don't know. I certainly hope we don't have an event that occurred that long at that depth,
right,
or that much area of the state. I mean, clearly the entire state was under the umbrella or the blanket of this storm. And I kept trying to remind my colleagues, I sat through about 29 hours of testimony. After that, we had combined committee meetings. I was on the Energy Resources Committee, and we had multiple hearings about it. And of course it was, some of my colleagues might ask a question. Well, you have a pump station that went down. How come don't y'all have pumpers that go out there and bleed the water off and make sure it doesn't freeze over? And, and I would remind them that they couldn't get out of their driveway. It takes a human being to get out of their driveway and drive to that remote location and do what's necessary to keep that pump station or compressor station operational. Yep. And so it's just the sheer depth of the storm, along with the ice, prevented a lot of human interaction with those sites that could have saved some of them. But then it's compounded. I had the president of Encore, who is one of the largest distributive systems we have and serves most of the Permian and Delaware Basin. I asked him, I said, we're talking about critical infrastructure sites. How many do you have on your board that reflects these are critical infrastructure sites? This would include hospitals. It would include fire stations, things like, how many do you have on your system? They said 35. Well, they had nearly 4,000 customers, I think, at the time. So it was just a small fraction of the, they had more than 4,000, but I think they had ultimately about 3,500 critical infrastructure sites that they didn't know about. And a lot of it is proprietary information by your viewers. They just don't want everybody to know where their compressor stations are, or what they're doing. I mean, a lot of it is proprietary, and I understand that. But we force them as a legislature to address that by designating any compressor site as critical infrastructure. Now I think we do have about 3,500 of those sites. So if we do have another event, and if we do have, if we don't have the capacity to meet the need, and there has to be some load shedding, then then hopefully those critical infrastructure sites will remain functioning so they can deliver, natural gas down the line for everybody's homes, and oil to the refineries. So I think we've made some good progress. We have required winterization equipment and techniques and planning for all of these sites, and I think the industry has responded timely and appropriately. So my thought is that we're much better prepared for another event like Winter Storm Uri, and I guess hopefully we won't see that type of event occur.
Yeah, no, it was a kind of seemed to be a once in a lifetime, but in today's world, once in a lifetime seems to be happening on a regular basis, unfortunately. Let's talk just general. We're about to run out of time, so just general, your sense on what the legislature has done, the state has done for the oil industry, successes or challenges that either you saw in the last session or that you think will be coming up. Anything for our viewers to contemplate?
Well, I will congratulate the industry. The industry has met the challenges at every junction. I mean, I can remember in the early 80s that it was projected that the Permian Basin was running out of oil. Well, we wouldn't have any more oil. So we saw the industry adapt and determined that there's a better way to frack our wells, and that is increased production. And so we all know that there's oil in place. There are 71 plus million barrels of oil to be recovered. So it's an industry that we can't do without. Everything that's on the screen and in the background is made in some form or fashion by an oil and gas molecule. Our planes cannot fly, our jet planes cannot fly on batteries. Our tanks can't be propelled with batteries. So you're going to have oil and gas. And so I think the industry, working with the legislature, has adapted to the increased capacity. We have seen a lot of pipelines be installed and on the ground. There are more on the drawing boards and in the construction phase right now. And so I think the legislature, we put in place incentives that the oil and gas industry can utilize. And so I think continue to share the message with legislators. The problem is, Grant, you and I talked about this a few minutes ago, there aren't many of us. There are 17 state representatives that represent 2/3 of the land mass of Texas. That is all the land lying west of I-35, 2/3 of the land mass. There's 17 of us. Well, in Harris County alone, there are 25.
Yeah.
So the folks who have the refineries and who need the electricity, they have more votes in Houston than we've got in West Texas. And so I keep reminding them, and this, if you'll forgive me, I keep telling them that you city folks, you like living there. But the last time I checked, they don't grow beef cattle in the back of the HEB in San Antonio. They don't grow cotton in the back of the Men's Warehouse in Dallas, Texas. In order to get the food, fiber, hide, hair, oil, gas, electricity to market, you have to allow us to keep some of those dollars here in West Texas so that we can have good roads so you can get your product to market, so we can have good schools that we can educate and have families that live in this area that load those trucks and trains. You have to have a good healthcare delivery system. Mama's not going to live where she doesn't have healthcare. And you have to have good public education. Without all of those needs, you're not going to be able to live in cities, because you can't live in a city without products delivered to you from rural Texas. And
sadly,
so
that kind of came as a surprise to probably many of the people you're talking to.
It does, and it stops and makes them think. Yeah, okay. Well, what have they done? Well, I think they've addressed our transportation needs. We have seen a lot of transportation dollars that are directed towards our rural Texas. We don't have problems with congestion. We have problems with safety, and people are dying on the roads out here in West Texas. And so, give us some money. They have. Is that enough? It's probably never going to be enough, but I think we need to continue to want to make sure our roads are safe. We have quality higher education institutions here. We have a healthcare delivery system, but the problem is it's rural Texas, and we're going to need broadband. There have been a lot of dollars dedicated to broadband, and all of which will help the oil and gas industry in particular, and the people who live and work here in West Texas. So number one, go to vote on November the 7th for the constitutional amendments. Included in those are a couple of provisions that I think will benefit everybody on your call. One is we're going to get more money for broadband here in Texas. Two, we're going to get money for water development. I told you we had to have good water, and that means that we're going to have more projects for our cities and delivery to remote areas. And so I think the legislature is responsive. I think the legislature, I had a bill 2 sessions ago that I think addresses some of the produced water needs. I've been very active in defining exactly what produced water is and what it means and who can have it, and what can you do to treat it. And if you treat it to a certain level, then who owns it? So all of that is critically important.
And those are proposition, I think 6, 7, and 8 that you're referring to that had broadband, electricity, and water implications. So
there's one in there. I
those
don't remember the number, but there's one about energy also. We're providing low interest rate loans to generators who will use that money to build new thermal generation. So I think that's important also.
Okay, thank you. It's one of the interesting, your point about the rural versus urban is so important, but it also speaks to the industry not promoting itself. And I talked to various CEOs and all, and it's like we need to talk about the industry and the importance of it, and what we're doing from an environmental side, the importance of it. And there seems to be a reluctance to create a public relations type of effort, even though the environmentalists are more than happy to do a public relations and a lobbying type effort. It seems like the Conocos and the Diamondbacks and those that you mentioned have the strength that they could really tell the story on electrification, on the need for the energy. But
well, you're exactly right. I think the oil and gas industry does a relatively poor job of telling the great story that it has. And they were very active in the last legislative session. So one of the problems, and I laugh and joke with them that it's hard you talk about herding cats. You try to get all those oil and gas operators, even though they have a common goal, you try to get them on the same page. It is like herding cats. And one of the frustrations I have is that, as an overall industry, you have big folks, you have absolutely huge folks, and then you have small operators. And what's necessarily good for the huge folks is not necessarily good for the big folks or the small ones. Yes. And you find yourself charging up the hill representing, quote, the industry, and you look around and there are very few stragglers with you. And so it's a frustrating political process. And I do share your thoughts, Grant, that we need a more unified and a more public voice about the industry.
Something that exists, yeah.
That exists.
Well, Chairman Darby, thank you very much. I've run past the time, but you didn't disappoint. Very informative. Appreciate the directness of the answers, and this has been fantastic. So thank you, sir, for what you do for the industry and for your district, and for participating in this.
Well, thank you, Grant. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning.